Have you ever wondered why we often act as though holding children accountable and trying to understand them cannot happen at the same time? No child is born hoping to become a subject of a tragic news or end up in conflict with the law. Along the way, something shaped that path, whether it was neglect, abuse, exploitation, violence, or the harmful influences they repeatedly experienced at home, within their community, or in society. So let me ask you another question. What kind of society only begins paying attention to a child after they have already become dangerous? Because if every tragedy ends with outrage, but never with reform, will continue producing the same headlines. And those questions lead us to the heart of today's discussion. And there's a saying that goes, it takes a village to raise a child, but the child who is not embraced by the village will burn down just to feel its warmth.
Good day. We are Agbulos, Cagas, Cometa, Okiren, Blanco, Danason, and Bautista. And welcome to our podcast, It Takes a Village, the ethics of raising a child and preventing juvenile violence. Today, we will examine violence through an ethical lens. Rather than asking only who should be punished after a crime has been committed, we ask a deeper question. Who bears the moral responsibility for preventing children from reaching out to that point in the first place? To begin answering the question, let's first understand the current situation of juvenile violence in the Philippines.
When we talk about juvenile violence, we are referring to violence involving young people, not just isolated incidents that makes the news. According to World Health Organization 2026, youth violence refers to violence that occurs among individuals aged 10 to 29 years, who are unrelated and may or may not know each other. It usually happens outside the home and includes behaviors such as bullying, technology, facilitated violence or cyberbullying, physical fighting, sexual and physical assault, gang related violence, and even homicide. In the Philippine Manluk, this issue has become increasingly concerning as more cases involving minors have gained public attention, as our Philippine National Police recorded an increase of 1,275 cases since the year 2022. These crimes committed by the minors have sparked debates about how society should respond. This creates an ethical dilemma because it raises difficult questions, such as should young offenders be treated primarily as criminals who deserve punishment, or as children who need guidance, rehabilitation, and support? How do we protect the victims while also recognizing that minors are still developing emotionally, psychologically, and morally? And that is why, according to American Psychological Association, ethics in juvenile justice system is founded on the understanding that young offenders are developmentally different from the adults because their decision making and moral reasoning are still developing. And the focus should be on rehabilitation rather than simply retribution or punishment. That is why our group chose this topic because of the growing number of crimes and violent incidents involving minors in the Philippines. And we believe that this issue goes beyond law enforcement. It is also an ethical concern. It challenges us to balance justice, accountability, human dignity, responsibility of the families, school, communities, and the government, and helping young people avoid violence while ensuring that victims receive the justice and protection that they deserve.
Those numbers are alarming. Who exactly is affected whenever a child becomes involved in violence?
Exactly. We often look at juvenile violence through a very narrow lens, like it's just a headline about a crime scene. But in reality, the trauma fractures an entire ecosystem. We have to talk about the children in conflict with the law. They aren't just perpetrators, they are almost always victims of systemic failure long before they ever commit an offense. An overwhelming majority of justice involved youth suffer from severe unaddressed trauma and co occurring mental health conditions stemming from early chronic childhood abuse or neglect, according to Dirk Singh et al. When these adolescents enter a punitive system rather than receiving therapeutic support, invasive and coercive carceral practices can easily trigger those psychological distress and severely disrupt their healthy developmental progress, according to Branson et al. And then, of course, there are the direct victims and their families, as they carry also a massive long term burden of physical and emotional devastation. According to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network 2022, this kind of sudden trauma completely disrupts family stability, leaving loved ones to navigate a brutal grief process without enough institutional support.
When a child commits a violent act, many people immediately demand punishment. But ethically speaking, is punishment alone enough?
Well, first, let's quickly understand why juvenile violence is even an ethical issue. We have to remember that during these stages, Holmes' research in 2023 shows that the human brain is a part of a charge of impulse and control judgment. It hasn't exactly fully developed. And so there is a research also by Kavanagh in 2022 showing these statistics for juvenile violence that they decline at a certain age. However, while this doesn't mean that the children can't have basic understanding of what is right from what is wrong, but it does explain the impulsiveness and the lack of maturity in their way of thinking. So, back to your question, I'd say that punishment alone isn't enough because this isn't just a legal issue, it is an ethical one. We should be willing to ask what their actions say about their character and how we could guide them towards this better moral character. For instance, virtue ethics in particular analyzes a child's environment and the role that it played in shaping their virtues and attitude. Also, in terms of human dignity, everyone possesses it, even those children who have committed serious crimes. A study by Billingham and Irwin Rogers in 2022 states that this situation must be treated delicately and with respect. But at the same time, we have to recognize that acknowledging the child's dignity does not mean that they can escape accountability. It's also like acknowledging that everyone has their rights, but those rights always come with certain duties. So, for example, children have the right to be protected, but they also have the duty to respect others. Parents have the duty to protect and guide their children as well.
So, how do different ethical theories help us answer our central question?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think ethical theories help us see that this issue is bigger than simply deciding who's at fault. Instead, they help us understand what responsibility actually looks like. First, let's start with justice. It reminds us that accountability is important, but fairness also requires us to look at the circumstances that shaped a child's behavior. Holding a child accountable should not mean ignoring the failures that may have contributed to that situation. Ethically, rights cannot exist without corresponding responsibilities. Children deserve protection, while parents, schools, communities, and the state share the duty of creating environments where those rights can be truly realized. Another useful perspective is virtue ethics. This focuses really on character. Qualities like responsibility, empathy, and self control are learned. If those values are not properly developed, we also have to ask whether the adults and the institutions around the children fulfill their responsibility. Although children possess developing autonomy, their capacity for fully independent decision making is still evolving. This is why ethical responsibility extends beyond adults entrusted with their care. And from a uh, consequentialist perspective, we look at its outcomes. The research that came from UNICEF has consistently shown that rehabilitation, education, and mental health supports are more effective in reducing future violence among youth than punishment alone. And also, the common good reminds us that raising children is a shared responsibility. When families, school, communities, and government work together, everyone benefits. So while children should still be accountable for their actions, these ethical theories suggest that responsibility is shared through by the people and institutions that influence their development.
So, if responsibility is shared, then the solution should probably be shared too.
What should we do? If we truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child, what should that village actually be doing?
So let's probably start with the family because that's usually where the child starts to learn its values, behavior, and relationships. Positive parenting is important because children need guidance, support, and healthy boundaries while they grow. If we do this, children are much more likely to make responsible choices when they grow up, feeling safe, heard, and valued. And then next, let's go with the schools because they do much more than just teach academic subjects. They also help shape character and social behavior. That's why access to mental health services and character education is important because it can help students develop emotionally and make better decisions before problems become serious. And another could be the community, having youth mentoring programs and safe spaces can give young people positive influences and a sense of belonging. So when communities invest in their youth, they can reduce the chances of children turning to harmful influences. And of course, we can't ignore the role of the government because everything leads to the government, right? Since the Philippines already has laws like the Juvenile Justice and the Welfare Act, or RA 9344, which emphasizes rehabilitation over punishment, we should also increase funding for Bahay Pag-asa facilities, expand access to child psychologists and social workers, strengthening school-based mental health programs, improve the implementation of RA 9344 at the local government level, and continue raising public awareness about the factors that contribute to juvenile violence. Because at the end of the day, preventing juvenile violence isn't something we do after a child enters the justice system. It begins in our homes, schools, communities, and institutions working together to support the child before they ever reach their crisis point.
And before we end, allow us to leave you with one final question. If every child reflects the environment that helps shape them, then what kind of future are we creating through the homes, the schools, communities, and society we build today? So, juvenile violence is not only a legal issue, but it's an ethical one. While young offenders must be held accountable, we must also ask what led them there in the first place. The responsibility does not rest on the children alone. Families, school, communities, and the government all have a role in guiding, protecting, and supporting them. In the end, prevention begins long before a child enters the justice system. It starts with the values, the care, and opportunities that we provide every day.
Okay, so let's end the podcast with one final reflection. Perhaps ethics is not only about deciding what should happen after harm has been done, it is also about asking whether we, as parents, educators, communities, and policymakers, have fulfilled our shared responsibility to guide, protect, and nurture every child. Because when a village embraces its children with accountability, compassion, and justice, it does more than prevent violence. It builds a future where every child has the chance to thrive. So, thank you for joining us in today's discussion. We hope this conversation encourages all of us to reflect not only on justice, but also on our shared responsibility in raising the next generation.
This has been It Takes a Village, Who Failed the Child, an ethical conversation on juvenile justice in the Philippines. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.